We'd like to say good evening to everyone and welcome everyone to our Wednesday evening Bible study. Let's start our service off with a prayer. Will you pray with me, please? Our Father in heaven, we're so thankful for this day and all the many blessings of life. We're thankful for Christ who gives the ultimate sacrifice. We ask that thou be with those that are sick here in this congregation. Be with those that have lost loved ones. We ask that thou would be with the teachers tonight as they present their lessons in a way that we can understand and take these things to our heart. We ask that go with us through this service and on down through life. All these blessings we ask in Christ's name. Amen.
We're glad you're present with us tonight as we open our Bibles to the book of Ezra and begin to continue our study, our survey of the Old Testament. And we trust that each of you will have a very safe and happy Thanksgiving. We certainly have much for which to be thankful, and we are grateful that at least is brought to our mind one time a year nationally. So we trust it'll be a good day for you. On your outline of Ezra, we are looking at the fact that the temple has now been completed and dedicated. Ezra 6, verses 14 through 22. And we were looking at verse 18 last time, where the priests and Levites were assigned according to their divisions or their courses. And David is the one that brought this about in the temple. There were 24 courses, and we turned to the book of Luke, and we read about Zacharias, who was of the 8th course, the course of Abijah, and he is the father of John the Immerser. Then in verse 19, we read about the celebration of the Passover. So this tells us the descendants of the captivity kept the Passover on the 14th day of the first month. Now, the 14th day of what month? Abib. 14th day of Abib. And where was this first inaugurated? I'm sorry?
Exodus 12.
All right. You probably have a reference to verse 6. And where are we in Exodus 12? We're in Egypt. We're getting ready to leave Egypt. And they were told to kill the Passover if they could not eat an entire lamb, to get with another household so it could be eaten. And they were to pour the blood out at the foot of the altar. True or false? That's an either or.
False.
Why?
They're supposed to put it on their doorpost.
Of their house.
And the lintels of the houses. And true or false, the death angel would pass over at midnight. Why false? No such thing as a death angel. We don't read about that anywhere in the Bible. Who passed over at midnight? Who did? Jehovah passed over at midnight, and he said, when I do what? See the blood, I will do what? Pass over you. Somebody wrote a song about that, didn't they? I think Carl leads it a good bit. When I see the blood. Background, Exodus 12, the inauguration of the Passover. True or false? The Passover was inaugurated under the law of Moses. False? Why?
Law of Moses, when he set in order until Mount Sinai, which is after they left Egypt.
All right, so we're still in Egypt. So we're under what law? Patriarchal. So the Passover is inaugurated under the patriarchal law. Is it incorporated into the Mosaic law? Yes. Is it incorporated into the law of Christ?
Note that there's an interesting correlation between it and the Lord's Supper. I mean, as far as that's when, I'm thinking that's might have been when Christ established, or right beforehand is when Christ established the Lord's Supper.
Okay, the question. Was it incorporated into the law of Christ? No. And the observation that it was in the observance of the last lawful Passover, Matthew 26, that after they had finished the Passover meal, Jesus instituted the Lord's Supper. That was the last Passover lawfully observed under the law of Moses. So here they rebuild the temple, they complete it, they get everything in order, and they celebrate the Passover. For the priests and the Levites had purified themselves, all of them were clean, and they slaughtered the Passover lambs for all the descendants of the captivity, for their brethren, the priests, and for themselves. Then the children of Israel who had returned from the captivity ate together with all who had separated themselves from the filth of the nations of the land in order to seek Jehovah the God of Israel. And they kept the feast of unleavened bread 7 days with joy. When was the feast of unleavened bread? Don't have time to reteach Exodus. Passover's Abib 14, Feast of Unleavened Bread, Abib 15 through 21 or 22. So it follows right on the heels of Passover. And in the New Testament, both Passover and the Feast of Unleavened Bread will be referred to, at least on one occasion, as the days of unleavened bread. Incorporated both feasts. So they kept both of them. And they kept the Feast of Unleavened Bread 7 days with joy, for Jehovah made them joyful, and turned the heart of the king of Assyria toward them, to strengthen their hands in the work of the house of God, the God of Israel. Assyria here is put in place of what? Was it the king of Assyria that had allowed them to finish the temple? was it? The king of Persia. So why would Assyria be placed here? Well, Assyria was a part of the Babylonian Empire. Babylon had conquered Assyria. And Persia conquered Babylon. So for some reason, this writer, inspired by the Holy Spirit, goes back to mention Assyria. And that's where the history had started with the captivities. So they celebrate Feast of Unleavened Bread, Feast of the Passover. This is about 516, 515, when the temple is completed and dedicated and the feast are kept. Now, this brings to an end, and I gave you two ways to calculate the 70 years. The 70-year captivity. This is the 6th year of Darius the First. Now, while all of this was taking place, Persia had conquered Babylon, but the Babylonians had silently been working behind the scenes to revolt from Persia. They had moved the capital to Shushan, and Shushan is also known as Susa. And Zechariah, during this time, sent a warning to the Jews who were still in Babylon to leave. If you turn to Zechariah chapter 2, beginning in verse 6, Zechariah said, Up, flee from the land of the north. That's Babylon. Says Jehovah, for I have spread you abroad like the four winds of heaven, says Jehovah. Up, Zion, escape, you who dwell with the daughter of Babylon. For thus says Jehovah of hosts, he sent me after glory to the nations which plundered you. For he who touches you touches the apple of his eye. For surely I will shake my hand against them, and they shall become spoil for their servants. Then you will know that Jehovah of hosts has sent me. So get out of the city, because the prophecies of Isaiah 13 and 47 verses 8 and 9 about the total fall of Babylon were about to be fulfilled. The city of Babylon was taken when one of Darius's officers, a man by the name of Zopyrus, cut off his own nose and ears, mangled his body, and presented himself to the Babylonians on pretense of having been cruelly treated by the Persian master. The Babylonians brought him in, put him in command of their armies. And when Darius came against the city, he capitulated to Darius and gave the city to the Persians. So Babylon fell, and this takes place about the time of the completion of the temple. Following this, Darius began a series of wars with Greece. Now, Greece is coming on the scene over to the east from Persia. Daniel will picture that in the latter part of his book as a great he-goat bounding from the east. And so Darius begins a series of wars with Greece, the Greek colonies on the shores of Asia Minor, and they are called Ionians. That's a good term for you to learn and to look up. They're called Ionians. Revolted against Persia and joined Greece. Now here's how these things worked. These armies would conquer a people, but often, if they didn't create a whole lot of problems, they would let them be self-governed. So they maintained their own government. And as long as they paid their taxes to the ruling power, they could basically do what they wanted to. But here comes another power. And if they want to be out from under that taxation, often they would join the advancing army and overthrow, in this case, the Persians. And so they joined Greece. So Darius mounted a campaign to conquer the colonies and Greece. So now we have a war building between Persia and Greece. His first fleet was wrecked at Mount Athos. The Athenians, out of Athens, Greece, met his army on the plains of Marathon. And you may, if you studied history, have studied the Battle of Marathon. These Athenians were headed by a man named Miltiades. And he defeated the Persian army. And Persia was defeated by Greece in these battles. About the time of the battles of Salamis and Marathon, over in the Persian Empire, a Jew was the minister. Another Jew was the cupbearer, and a Jewess was the consort of a Persian monarch. So you're going to have men in great position among Persia who are Jews. Darius added a few provinces to the empire. He added India, Thrace, and Macedonia. That will be important, particularly Thrace and Macedonia, in the empire of Greece, and especially with Alexander the Great. When Darius died in 486 BC, the Persian Empire extended from the Indus to the Aegean, and from Scythia, which is now Russia, to the cataracts of the Nile River. So you want to look that up, you see a broad empire. Darius is credited with establishing the Persian postal system, in which posts, letters, messages, were carried by swift riders throughout the empire. Wherever the Persian king was, there was the government. For everything depended upon his decrees. What he had said was law. And remember, the laws of the Medes and Persians could not be altered. So when he made an announcement, it had to be carried to every part of his empire. We've looked at the vastness of the empire. You had to get that message around. So routes, if you're from up north, routes, used for centuries, connected the ancient cities which Cyrus conquered from the Babylonians in 539 BC. At regular stations, 15 to 20 miles apart, there were rest houses with stables. Here, fresh horses awaited the couriers so that they could speed on their way or hand over their messages to a fresh messenger. Does that sound anything vaguely familiar to us? That sounds exactly like the Pony Express. And if you go to St. Joseph, Missouri, there is a Pony Express museum. Quite interesting to tour and to read about, see, how these writers took these messages. Well, that wasn't a new system. Darius I inaugurated that in Persia. And so you had messages being swiftly carried from one part of the empire to another. An inscription was found on a cliff on Mount Behishtan in western Iran, which was established and authored by Darius the Great. The inscription is written in Persian, Elamite, and Babylonian languages. It was important when they found this to help them to be able to decipher cuneiform writing. And when we began to look at how we got the Bible, we talked about cuneiform writing. The inscription, approximately 49 feet high, 82 feet wide, 330 feet up a limestone cliff from an ancient road connecting the capitals of Babylonia and Media. The Old Persian text contains 414 lines in 5 columns. The Elamite text includes 260 lines in 8 columns, and the Babylonian text is in 112 lines. A copy of the text in Aramaic, written during the reign of Darius II, was found in Egypt. The inscription was illustrated by a life-sized bas relief of Darius I, the Great, holding a bow as a sign of kingship, with his left foot on the chest of a figure lying on his back before him. The supine figure is reputed to be the pretender Gaumetal. Darius is attended to the left by 2 servants, and 9 1-meter figures stand to the right with hands tied and rope around their necks, representing conquered peoples. A symbol of Zoroastrianism, a Persian religion, floats above, giving its blessings to the king. One figure appears to have been added after the others were completed, as was Darius's beard, which is a separate block of stone attached with iron pins and lead. So Darius had his figure carved way up on that mountain. And all these things there, but I wanted to read that to you to call attention to the fact that he was standing there with his foot on the chest of a fallen enemy. Does that call up a Bible expression? Kings conquered an enemy, and they would put their foot on that enemy to signify complete conquering. Does that call up a Bible expression to any of you? Turn to 1 Corinthians 15. Just off the top of your head, when you hear 1 Corinthians 15, you think about what? Resurrection. And beginning the paragraph that begins at verse 20 in 1 Corinthians 15, but now Christ is risen from the dead and has become the first fruits of those who have fallen asleep, and that's a euphemism for died. For since by man came death, by man also came the resurrection of the dead. For as in Adam all die, even so in Christ all shall be made alive. But each one in his own order, Christ the firstfruits. Afterwards, those who are Christ's at his coming. Then comes the end, when he delivers the kingdom to God the Father, when he puts an end to all rule and all authority and power, for he must reign till he has put all enemies where? under his feet. Now that's the picture. That was the picture of a king who had conquered a people, putting his foot on the fallen soldier to indicate conquest, usually on the king of the country that had been conquered. So here's Jesus, the king of the kingdom, ruling over the kingdom until he has put all his enemies under his feet. The last enemy that will be destroyed is death. For he has put all things under his feet. But when he says all things are put under him, it is evident that he who put all things under him is accepted. Now, when all things are, now here's a synonym to putting things under his feet. When all things are made, do you have subject to him? I'm hearing you, but I'm not understanding.
Shall be subdued unto him.
Say it again. Two of you were talking. Sherry, go ahead.
So shall be subdued.
Subdued. Is that what you were trying to say? Two of you talked at the same time. I heard both of you and understood neither. All these enemies are to be subdued, all right, when they are subject to him. So put all things under his feet is to subdue, to bring things into subjection. Then the Son himself will also be subject to him who put all things under him, that God may be all in all. So Jesus is going to reign until he has conquered death. And then he will deliver the kingdom up to God. But the picture of the conquest is putting your feet on the chest or the head of the fallen enemy. And that comes from the ancient kingdoms and the activity of those kings in those kingdoms. So it's not new terminology. And it's not a new idea when you get to 1 Corinthians 15. Now, after the death of Darius I, and this should pick back up at least on your outline, Xerxes I, 486 to 465, considered to be the worst of all the Archemenian monarchs, came to the throne. Xerxes the first. Now, this statement in your notes. He is the Ahasuerus of the book of Esther. He ruled from India unto Ethiopia over 127 provinces. He chose Esther as queen in 478 BC, and Mordecai was his prime minister. Between Ezra chapters 6 and 7, there is about a 60-year interval. And during that time, we read the events of Esther and some things that are taking place in the empire. Now, when I covered with you the minor prophets in when to put things in, I suggested to you at the end of Ezra 6, we would cover Haggai, Zechariah, and then Esther. And we've already seen back in chapter 5 that Haggai and Zechariah encouraged them to complete the temple. So you could, if you wanted so to do, when you covered chapter 5, cover Haggai and Zechariah, but I choose to do so after the completion of the temple, and that's a judgment call. Now, to get an idea of Xerxes, let's turn to the book of Esther. Now, you may have wondered why, when I would talk about the last 6 books of the Old Testament, I would always say Ezra, Esther, and Nehemiah. And the reason I put them in that order is Esther comes in this interim between Ezra chapter 6 and 7. So you go to Esther 1 and verse 1. Generally, if you read many of the introductions to Esther, you will find that the name of God is not found in the book of Esther. But you will also find that most people believe Esther is one of the greatest books that shows the providence of God that we have in the Bible. Esther's Hebrew name is Hadassah, but her Persian name, Esther, was derived from the Persian word for star, starah. The Greek title of the book is Esther. The Latin title is Hester, Hester. Now, it's dated for us in Esther 1:1. Now, it came to pass in the days of Ahasuerus. And you may have a marginal reading in your Bible, or those of you with Thompson may have a number, that will identify him with Xerxes the First, 485, 486 to 465, 464. Came to pass in the days of Xerxes the First, Ahasuerus. This was the Ahasuerus who reigned over 127 provinces from India to Ethiopia. In those days, when King Ahasuerus sat on the throne of his kingdom, which was in Shushan, and you may have a marginal reading or a number to Susa. Susa, Shushan. The citadel, the American Standard, the palace. This is where the king sits. That in the 3rd year of his reign, now if he began to reign in 486, this would be in the neighborhood of 483. The 3rd year of his reign. He made a feast for all his officials and servants, the powers of Persia and Media, the nobles and the princes of the provinces before him. When he showed the riches of his glorious kingdom and the splendor of his excellent majesty for many days, 180 days. So he put on quite a show and quite a feast, bringing these people in. And when these days were completed, the king made a feast lasting 7 days for all the people who were present in Shushan, the citadel, from great to small, in the court of the garden of the king's palace. There were white and blue linen curtains fastened with cords of fine linen and purple on silver rods and marble pillars. The couches were of gold and silver on a mosaic pavement of alabaster, turquoise, and white and black marble. So quite splendorous in this display. And they served drinks in golden vessels, each vessel being different from the other, with royal wine in abundance, according to the generosity, literally the hand of the king. In accordance with the law, the drinking was not compulsory. For so the king had ordered all the officers of his household that they should do according to each man's pleasure. So they weren't commanded to drink. Queen Vashti also made a feast for the women in the royal palace, which belonged to King Ahasuerus. On the 7th day, when the heart of the king was merry with wine, that's a euphemism for what? Drunk. he commanded Mehuman, Biztha, Harbona, Bigtha, Abagtha, Zether, and Carcass, 7 eunuchs, and eunuch here may be literal or it may mean officers, who served in the presence of King Ahasuerus, to bring Queen Vashti before the king, wearing her royal crown, in order to show her beauty to the people and the officials. For she was beautiful to behold. And the indication is he wanted her to come wearing only her crown, to come naked before all these drunks. Circle it. But Queen Vashti refused to come at the king's command, brought by his eunuchs. Therefore the king was furious, and his anger burned within him. She had more morality than he did. Then the king said to the wise men who understand or understood the times, now this would be your magi, for this was the king's manner toward all who knew law and justice. Those closest to him, Karshena, Shethar, Admatha, Tarshish, Merez, Marsena, and Memucan, the 7 princes of Persia and Media, who had access to the king's presence. So this would be, we might call them his inner cabinet, and who ranked highest in the kingdom, literally who sat in first place. What shall we do to Queen Vashti according to law? He's saying, now search out the law and see what happens to someone who disobeys the king's command. Because she did not obey the command of King Ahasuerus by the eunuchs. And Memucan answered before the king and the princes, Queen Vashti has not only wronged the king, but also all the princes and all the people who are in all the provinces of King Ahasuerus. Now that's exaggeration exaggerated, isn't it? For the queen's behavior will become known to all women, so that they will despise their husbands in their eyes when they report. King Ahasuerus commanded Queen Vashti to be brought in before him, but she did not come. So you are going to, if you don't clamp down on this, encourage every woman in the province to rebel against her husband. If the queen can get away with it, why can't they? So you are going to be responsible for women's lib. And this was the advice that was given. This very day, the ladies of Persia and Media will say to all the king's officials that they've heard of the behavior of the queen. Thus there will be excessive contempt and wrath. If it pleases the king, let a royal decree go out from him, and let it be recorded in the laws of the Persians and the Medes, so that it will not be altered. See, if he signed it, it couldn't be altered. Keep that in mind. You read Esther. That law, once it's signed, the king can't change. That Vashti shall come no more before King Ahasuerus, and let the king give her royal position to another who is better than she. When the king's decree, which he will make, is proclaimed throughout all his empire, now it would be proclaimed by the royal posts. The edict written down and the report taken by these postal riders and given. Is proclaimed throughout all his empire, for it is great. All wives will honor their husbands, both great and small. And the reply pleased the king and the princes, and the king did according to the word of Memucan. Then he sent letters to all the king's provinces, to each province in its own script, and to every people in their own language, that each man should be master in his own house, and speak in the language of his own people. So the only way women could be kept in place in Persia, seemingly, was by an edict of the king, according to Memucan, which the king liked. So how would you women like to have lived in Persia? After these things, when the wrath of King Ahasuerus subsided, which probably means he sobered up, he remembered Vashti, what she had done and what had been decreed against her. Then the king's servants who attended him said, "Let beautiful young virgins be sought for the king, and let the king appoint officers in all the provinces of his kingdom, that they may garner all the beautiful young virgins to Shushan the citadel, into the women's quarters." Now notice, the women and the men did not live together. They each had separate living arrangements. Under the custody of Hegai, the king's eunuch, custodian of the women, and let beauty preparations be given them. So you bring them in and you give them beauty treatments. Then let the young woman who pleases the king be queen instead of Vashti. This thing pleased the king, and he did so. This may be the first beauty pageant of which we read. Bring these women in, parade them before the king. Let him pick one. In Shushan the citadel, in Susa the palace, there was a certain Jew whose name was Mordecai, the son of Jair, the son of Shimei, the son of Kish, a Benjamite. Kish was the son of Benjamin. Do you, off the top of your head, remember a famous son of Kish? King Saul, first king of the United Kingdom. And remember, he was on a mission to find the donkeys of his father. When we're introduced to him, he's out looking for his father's donkeys. I'll sidetrack here to tell you an interesting thing that happened during the Restoration movement. I do not remember the preacher. It may have been Raccoon John Smith. It sounds a lot like him. But whomever he was going to a certain city to preach. And 3 mischievous boys decided they would have some fun with the preacher as he came into town. So as he came into town, one of them jumped out and said, "Good morning, Father Abraham." And he went on. Later, the second jumped out, "Good morning, Father Isaac." And he went on. The third one jumped out, "Good morning, Father Jacob." And he said, "I am neither Abraham, Isaac, nor Jacob, but Saul, the son of Kish, out looking for my father's asses, and behold, I've found 3 of them." So if you know a little Bible sometimes, you might come in handy with mischievous boys. Kish had been carried away from Jerusalem with the captives who had been captured with Jeconiah, now that's Jehoiakim, king of Judah, whom Nebuchadnezzar, the king of Babylon, had carried away. So you go back to which carrying away that involved Jeconiah, and you'll know which carrying away involved Mordecai. And Mordecai had brought up, now do you have Hadassah? Everybody have Hadassah here? That is Esther, his uncle's daughter, for she had neither father nor mother. So he had adopted her and had raised her. The young woman was lovely and beautiful, When her father and mother died, Mordecai took her as his own daughter. So it was, when the king's command and decree were heard, and when many young women were gathered at Shushan the citadel, under the custody of Hegai, that Esther also was taken to the king's palace, into the care of Hegai, the custodian of the women. So here you have Esther, a Jewess. Now the young woman pleased him, and she obtained his favor. So he readily gave beauty preparations to her, besides her allowance. Then 7 choice maidservants were provided for her from the king's palace, and he moved her and her maidservants to the best place in the house of the women. So she's promoted to first place. Esther had not revealed her people. She had not told that she was a Jewess or family, for Mordecai had charged her not to reveal. The Jews were not necessarily in great favor. And every day Mordecai paced in front of the court of the women's quarters to learn of Esther's welfare and what was happening to her. Is there a daddy in this assembly that can't understand that? He's concerned. He's waiting to hear word every day. Each young woman's turn came to go in to King Ahasuerus after she had completed 12 months' preparation, according to the regulations for the women, for thus were the days of their preparation apportioned: 6 months with oil of myrrh, 6 months with perfumes and preparations for beautifying women. This is humorous to me. They are the most beautiful in the empire, and yet it took a year to get them beautiful enough to serve the king. So you can only wonder, what did they look like when they first got there? And now they've gone through all this beautification. Thus prepared, each young woman went to the king, and she was given whatever she desired to take with her from the women's quarters to the king's palace. So she's in this beauty contest. The king did not hold out his scepter for the bell to enter, so it has come in uninvited. Therefore, it should be executed. And I thank you for listening and participating. Lord willing, our next broadcast, for those of you on social media, will be Sunday morning at 10.